Hey everybody, welcome to the Glasses Push. My name's Chuck, and today we're talking about Clockwork Angels, the novel by Kevin J. Anderson, with story by Neil Peart. So, who should read this? Why should you care? Well, of course, Rush is one of the most seminal prog bands that has ever been. They had a 40-plus year career, and their last album, Clockwork Angels, was their first full concept album. The fact that 2112's first half is a concept does not make the whole album a concept album, because the B-side is a collection of unrelated songs, so that's not what this is about. So anyway, Rush, amazing band, and their last album was a concept album, and was an incredible album at that. So, of course, the prospect that there is more to the story and to see the world of this album fully fleshed out, obviously appealing to any Rush fan. And also, Kevin J. Anderson, I'm taking on the good authority of the internet, is a well-respected science fiction author who I am woefully ignorant of, except for his involvement in this project. But all of the aforementioned reasons are good enough reasons to check this out. But what did I think? So, obviously, I have a bias because of Rush. However, if there was one criticism I had about the album Clockwork Angels, is that the concept itself did not seem very developed. It was basically a series of misadventures followed by a very wistful and touching look back at a life well lived, to see that life isn't necessarily about the destination, but rather the all of the stops you make along the way. Clearly a very trite statement, but at the same time it doesn't make it any less true, and much in the same way that the sentiment, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. It isn't necessarily about the message itself, but how the message is told. And with that, Rush, and especially Neil's lyrical contributions on that album, were incredibly powerful. A lot of statements about regret, about wanting to live everything again, about experience, and a lot of great statements about life. Something that can only be stated when you have lived a full life. So, how does that translate into Clockwork Angels, the novel? Well, we actually get a more clear idea of who the protagonists and antagonists are of this story. But the problem is, everything is a little too simplistic and one note. We have the teenager that is longing for freedom and adventure, two antagonists that are at the polar opposite ends of the spectrum of order. One is quite literally an anarchist, the anarchist, that believes that life can only be truly free when you break down all order, and you have to reconcile that with somebody called the Watchmaker, who wants literally every second of every day to be accounted for, and having a strict schedule, what could go wrong if everything is planned out perfectly? So, throughout these adventures, of course, our protagonist sees that, really the sweet spot in life lies somewhere in the middle, which it is interesting to explore the concepts from different flawed characters where everyone has a different idyllic view of what life should be, but no one really has the perfect answer. So while that message isn't directly stated, the theme is heavily explored throughout about what is the proper way to live life. No answer is really given, and so that exploration is interesting. There is a heavy steampunk motif to the novel. While I have not read really any other representations of the steampunk genre, it is a very interesting world that has been created where any type of magic or futuristic device is heavily rooted in ancient ways. But beyond the basic backdrop of the story and the kind of weighty concepts that are discussed during it, a lot of the novel falls flat. There is a love interest that just, anytime there's a complication in it throughout this romance and this courtship, everything feels so painfully obvious as to what is happening, and yet in this way that the book is plotted, it really feels like the author felt that we would be a step behind, perhaps, but in all actuality, we can. It's painfully obvious to us what's going to happen. So there wasn't really much suspense in that regard. The prose is relatively simple, but with a complication that is unique to fans of Rush, and this will be, a pretty divisive opinion, I believe. So Neil and Kevin weaved in a lot of references to Rush songs with Rush lyrics, sometimes the occasional character name, throughout the entirety of the novel in just a regular sentence. Sometimes it's a little more understated, and then you sometimes have somebody that just shouts out, "Roll the bones." So while somebody who is not interested in Rush would not be distracted by this, I actually found it highly distracting, as I'm looking for the nuanced story behind the album, and instead it would seem that you would only get through a quarter of a chapter, an eighth of a chapter, and in the middle of a sentence is a Rush reference that you think, oh, is this a reference? Oh, what song was that? Oh, yeah. Oh, wait, what's happening in the book now? I've just been trying to think about where I knew that phrase. So it really took me out of the novel, and perhaps that is my fault for, not wanting that distraction. If you enjoy Easter eggs like that and clever cultural references, then Rush fans are going to eat it up, and people that are not very familiar with Rush, I'm sure it fits well into the story if you're not a Rush fan. Prose or Easter eggs aside, every character kind of lacks any type of dynamic, and especially when you're following the character of a teenager, they don't have a particularly interesting mindset, and while the character eventually matures a little, there isn't much of an arc. It's not a full arc. It's a very small, limited arc. So, not much to say in character development. However, the book does break up that monotony a little by having chapters that focus on one of the two antagonists. So the anarchist and the watchmaker chapters are especially interesting to actually get the perspective of the villains. In their own way, it does make sense, all of these opposing views. So I will say props to Kevin J. Anderson for this, that he did not make any character obviously wrong. Instead, there are flaws with all. So I will say that the foundation of these characters is interesting, but in terms of any progression, that there is absolutely none to speak of. Or very little, I should say. To wrap things up, as I mentioned that the Rush album has a very moving conclusion in which it sums up a life well lived. The final track of Clockwork Angels, The Garden, is one of Rush's favorite songs and is definitely one of my favorite Rush songs, an incredibly emotional, powerful statement. Whereas the denouement of Clockwork Angels, the novel, does not feel so earned. The final encounter with the antagonists is very lackluster, which, of course, you can validate by it's about the journey, not the destination. But if the destination isn't that interesting and the journey along the way was not that exciting, then if the journey wasn't that great either, you know, which is ironic, because if you know is my conclusion, then am I really better than them? No, I'm just an amateur critic. Take that for what you will. What would I rate it? As much as I love Rush, and as much as there were some interesting elements in terms of the steampunk world and the moral ambiguity of the novel, it was at times very difficult to get through and didn't really have much in the way of surprises, and in some ways was actually frustrating. And perhaps that's my unique experience as a Rush fanatic, and maybe I'm in the minority here. But I feel that this novel, just didn't really have what it takes. I'm going to give it a 59. It wasn't really a failure, but it was very disappointing to me and didn't have a whole lot to make me care about the journey as a whole. However, that's just one man's opinion. Have you read this? If so, what did you think? Are you a Rush fan, or are you not? Please list your favorite Rush song or album in the comments, because I would love to nerd out about Rush. And if you are a Rush fan who read this book, what did you think of the references, and should that matter? Easter eggs. Let's talk about those. Are they distracting? Are they cool? What do you think? Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please, hit the like button and subscribe. Do all the stuff there at the buttons at the bottom. You know how YouTube works. I don't need to tell you this. Glasses push out.